So hi everyone, welcome to our first ever SFS Student Resource Committee happy hour mentor panel thing. We're really excited for this tonight and we're thinking it's going to go really well. I'm going to start with just like a quick introduction, some instructions and everything. So today, this happy hour, we're going to be hearing from 6 SFS Fellows on their experiences in freshwater science and in our society. And we're going to follow this event up with an open Twitter lunch chat on Friday starting at 11. The lunch chat's going to be open for everyone, members, non-members, but we've done our best to take special care to invite fellows and career awardees who have Twitter accounts to join in on that discussion. But before we get started today, wanted to take a minute to kind of explain the format and expectations of the happy hour today. For the first half today, I'm going to be moderating. Hi, I'm Mitchell Owens. For those that don't know me, I'm a PhD student at Indiana University in the Department of Geography. And I'm going to be asking the panelists to introduce themselves, respond to a few pre-prepared questions that those of us that organized this wrote and put together. Students, as y'all that are watching this, if you come up with questions as we're going, whether they're general questions to the whole panel or specific to a singular person, please type them into the chat, and we'll use them for the second part of this panel. Kate Kahn, our other organizer, is going to be moderating for the second half. She's going to go through your questions, and she will call on you to ask your questions to the panel when we get to that. So if you do write a question, please remember it. But we won't be able to ask all of our questions today, unfortunately, but those that we don't ask, we're going to try and use Friday for our Twitter chat. As for expectations, we want to remind everyone to abide by the SFS Code of Conduct, and we're going to reiterate the expectation that we all communicate openly and with respect and consideration for others, valuing a diversity of views and opinions. We've invited panelists here to speak about their individual journeys, and we're grateful that they are willing to share with us and engage in conversation. We also want to take a moment to acknowledge that people with different identities have had different experiences within their professions and as SFS members. The recent Black in the Ivory tweets, for instance, have exposed many racist experiences Black academics have been subjected to. For those that have not seen these tweets, Kate and I would encourage you to read them. Our panelists, both this week and in the future 2 weeks that we're doing this event, likely can't speak to all of these experiences, and we'll go ahead and say now to our panelists, we don't expect you to. We encourage folks to speak from their experiences using I statements where applicable, and to keep in mind that others may face additional or different hurdles in their career. Further, as we learn and grow as a society, we look forward to hearing, incorporating, and amplifying even more perspectives in our student mentor events. And if anyone has suggestions or concerns in regard to any of our events, please let us know. With that, we're going to start the Fellows Week Happy Hour panel. For those of you who are here that don't know, SFS Fellows have been formally recognized by the Society as people who have demonstrated sustained excellence and contributions to freshwater science, research, policy, or management. Our goal this week is to connect you, our students, with these most established members of our society to build community and our professional networks. Our panelists this week are Jen Tank, Dave Penrose, Chuck Hawkins, Bob Hughes, and Jan Stevenson, and we're hoping Valeria Souza jumps on at some point.
I'm here. Oh,
hello! Valeria Souza is here. We have our full panel.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and start with introductions from everyone, just in 1 to 2 minutes. Who are you? Where are you currently? What do you do, and what perspectives, either personal or professional, are you bringing to this panel? Whoever wants to start, take it away.
Well, I'll go first. I'm Dave Penrose. I live in North Carolina. I actually live in Asheville. Now, most of my career was spent in Raleigh, NC State University, and prior to that with the Division of Water Quality, where I spent a good deal of my career working on developing metrics to evaluate streams using aquatic insects. I retired from NC State in 2009, I think, and could not stop doing what I love the most. So I started a small one-man consulting firm in Asheville, and I specialize in looking at restoration, stream restoration projects, because I feel that restoration is such a unique opportunity for young people to get involved in biological evaluations, because where else do you have the opportunity to watch a system start from birth, from nothing, and grow and evolve into something that's functional? And I think that's pretty amazing opportunity for young folks. I have to admit that I may be the oldest person on this panel, and my first meeting was the Midwest Benthological Association in 1976. I was a student at the University of Michigan at that point, and I have missed, prior to missing the Madison meeting, I've only missed one other meeting since that 1976 meeting. So it's a long but pleasant journey for me. Thanks. Next.
Well, if you want, I can speak. I am an evolutionary microbial ecologist of particularly stromatolites in freshwater ponds in Cuatro Ciénegas. That sounds a very particular job, but end up that these particular ponds in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert are extremely diverse and particularly endangered. So I have devoted the last 20 years of my life in saving them and understand them.
Wow.
And they have stored the history of life on Earth probably since the Archean, when the planet was orange. And they transform Earth bubble by bubble by assembling all the metabolisms that were born actually in the stromatolites. And they are the geoengineers of Earth. And I have the enormous privilege of understanding them and protect them. And thank you for the award. Make me very happy. And it's my first meeting that I didn't assist also. So you are the eldest, David, with the earlier meeting, and I'm the newest with the no meeting.
Thank you. Who wants to hop on next?
I'll try. This is Bob Hughes. I think I might be older than Dave, even though I don't look older. We can debate that offline. I'm retired on-site contractor with the US EPA. And most of my career there was focused on developing biological monitoring and biological assessment approaches for the agency. And since retirement, I've been trying to transmit that knowledge to colleagues in China, Europe, and South America.
Great, I can jump in next. I'm Jen Tank. I am at the University of Notre Dame. I am a stream biogeochemist. I was pretty darn geeked that Dennis Newbold's talk today was everything I hold near and dear to my heart. So that was amazing. I am the recent past president of SFS. So just got done with the 3-year role of our presidency. So I feel like I know SFS pretty intimately now. And I think the professional perspectives that I might bring to the panel that is something unique is that as a graduate student, I was trained with Jack Webster at Virginia Tech and some of the most pristine systems. They were gated off from the rest of the world. And I think of it as really, you know, fundamental, foundational stream biogeochemistry. And then I ended up in my career, since 2000, I've been at Notre Dame, which is in the heart of the agricultural Midwest. Time to retool who you are and what you do and how you train your students. especially of field work, which my students, you know, that's a big part of what they do. It's close to home here in the Midwest. We have to think about the questions. So that's just one perspective I think I bring a little different. And the other thing is I'm only a first-year fellow, so I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm new at that part of it. So thanks.
Chuck, go ahead.
I'm Chuck Hawkins. I'm on the faculty at Utah State University. Looks like Bob and I are the two Western, or I guess Valeria is also a Westerner. I came to Utah State in 1983 to join the faculty. I did my PhD at Oregon State, worked in Pacific Northwest old growth systems before coming out to Utah. I'm a little schizophrenic in terms of my particular interest. I sort of, half of my time is spent thinking about basic ecological processes and patterns, mostly at the community level. The other half I spend trying to figure out how I can make sense of or use that information to improve environmental monitoring and assessment. And so I spend quite a bit of my time working with state and federal agencies out in the West as well. I guess the perspective I would bring to this is that although it's not so much true now, in the past there was definitely a bit of a distinction between the ivory tower and agency work, I think. And over the years, I've seen that disappear. And I think that's been a major benefit of SFS in terms of making that happen. And so, you know, one of the things that I probably take the most pride in is being able to work closely with management agencies on the ground and help figure out how to do things better. Oh, and I'm also editor of the journal.
Let me add something. I'm in Mexico, so I'm the representative of this panel from the Deep South, South, and it's called the Big South, and most of Earth actually is all Latin America, Africa, half Asia, and we are just called the Big South, which is odd. We are part of North America, the South tip, but yes, we are part of North America.
So I'm Jan Stevenson.
Yep. Jan, you're up. Yep.
I'm a professor at Michigan State University, and I teach classes on algal biology and environmental science, I guess. It was a good way to describe it, environmental issues and public policy. So I, like Chuck, have to go back and forth between doing algal ecology and ecological assessment, primarily with algae, with the idea of, you know, having sound science underpinning how we, you know, basically use algal ecology to solve problems with algae, or just infer changes in ecological systems that way. Maybe a couple perspectives that I bring that are a little different is I moved from universities, so as an academic, I moved from one university to another through my career, with going from teaching maybe 6 classes a year to teaching 1.5. And then the other thing is, more in the last like 15 years, I've started working with social scientists a lot and working on ecosystem valuation, but also more critically, just linking the two, bridging natural sciences and social sciences into a broader definition of environmental science.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you all for those wonderful introductions. Let's get started with some hard-hitting questions here, I guess. Just to get started here, when we think of SFS Fellows, you all as a group even those of you that are new to it, because I think we have 3 first-year fellows on the panel right now. We think of the fellows as these perfect paragons of freshwater science, but we know life and research are often a lot messier behind the scenes than it kind of shows up with these big awards. Can you guys speak to some of the missteps or failures you've had along your career? Jen, go for it.
Yeah, I chuckled at that question. You guys, thank you so much for such really good questions. The sort of group of questions you gave us was really thought-provoking, so I appreciate that. I didn't know you were going to go to this one next, so you've taken, but this one was a tough one for me, and it's not because I don't make mistakes, but more because, like, which one to pick? But I wanted to think of one of the many that applied really to early career students, graduate students. And I think one of them was, as a young assistant professor, I think my desire for my students to succeed, and they definitely did, but I think I was overbearing in my enthusiasm for them to be all that they could be. And I it's like overwatering a plant. I should have just backed off sometimes, and God love them that they still talk to me. And, but I look back on those first few years as an assistant professor. So I guess the mistake it's not a mistake, but something I learned from is just giving your students the space to let them thrive is a gift that I wish I would have had at the very beginning, but I learned through time, hopefully.
Valeria, I see you with your hand up.
So it was not a mistake, but it was a mistake for my advisor. I decided to have a baby in the middle of the PhD, and my advisor was really mad at me, and how did I dare not to think on my career first? And I thought about my person and about my family first. And I had to demonstrate him that I could do both, do a PhD dissertation and a baby. And the problem was that both my husband and I were his students, his first students. And so he was really mad at this distraction called Felipe. But it ended up well. And then he actually asked for forgiveness for his bad behavior when he hired me as a young professor in the same university. He was the director of the institute. So I promised myself never be harsh with my students when they have a family, and actually to be very supportive, because as graduate students, you are in the most fragile part of your life. You are starting a family, living with your couple, and having a very rough time writing that damn thing called a PhD dissertation. And it's never easy. And if your advisor is against you, it makes it really, really, really hard and maybe impossible. But I was very stubborn, and here I am now, big professor supposedly. But yes, please be nice, be kind, always be generous.
Oh, Dave, I think you might be muted. There we go.
I've certainly made a lot of tactical errors as a regulatory biologist, but I think one that may serve as an example for young people involves the link between stream ecology and social behavior in some regards. So Bob and Jan, you may be interested in this very old story, but doing some work on some streams in apple orchards, I noticed years ago that there were, that a particular group of aquatic insects was completely eliminated, those being the stoneflies, very sensitive group of insects. And they were missing primarily from a watershed that had lots of apple growing in it, and a lot of insecticides and rodenticides were used to preserve the apple crop. But it took a toll on the streams. And when I worked as a state biologist, one of my responsibilities was to look at the effects of non-point source runoff. Well, it was clear, in my opinion, that the apple orchards were affecting stream ecology, that we picked up endrin and fish tissue samples, and we lost stoneflies and all that. So that's all very well and good. But when the newspaper people, when the media people approach you with this kind of information, you need to be real careful how you approach that, because you can make a lot of people really mad if you say, oh yeah, apple orchards in general are just horrible to stream ecology. Political people will pick up on this like that. The very next day after this story came out in the Raleigh News and Observer, the director of my division called me up and he said, Mr. Penrose, we are in the process of evaluating your usefulness as a biologist for the state of North Carolina. We're having a meeting this afternoon to discuss your fate. You know, and as a young biologist, I'm going, sheesh, what have I done? But I think that's a lesson that young people need to keep in mind when they're looking at their data and comparing it to social things as well. So Bob, I can tell you're chuckling at that story, but it's true.
Yeah, with that lead in, Dave's right, you have to be cautious, but I would say my biggest mistake is not interacting as much as I should have with the public, to Lions clubs, Kiwanis groups, high school, undergraduate students, elementary school students. You have to let your expertise down a lot. You have to be careful on what you say and how you say it. But I think if we're only talking to ourselves, we're doomed. And so are the resources we love so much.
I have a slightly different sort of failure, if you please. One of the things we all do a lot of as scientists is communicate. In fact, we are probably better characterized as professional communicators than almost anything else. It's just that science is our topic. And we do that through both giving talks as well as writing reports and papers and so forth. So one of the things that is endearing about SFS, or NABS as it used to be called, is that the society is so friendly and so collegial, and we can get into arguments over beer during happy hours and whatnot and disagree with one another. And there's usually no hard feelings because it's all in the spirit of communicating with each other and letting others know what our thoughts are. But those of you who have given talks, I don't know how much training you've had or what inputs you have had or experiences you've had, but speakers often try to put some humor into their talks so that the talks aren't quite as dry as they might otherwise be. So when I was a graduate student at Oregon State, I went to a conference and gave a talk in which I attempted to provide some humor just to lighten the mood a little bit. And I'll give you a hint as to what that humor was about. I gave a talk called Functional or Fictional Groups, and then I colon, and I can't remember what the rest was, but it was basically a talk in which I described some patterns that we had seen in Western Oregon that didn't fit the functional sort of feeding group paradigm. And I thought, inappropriately, it turned out that maybe the best way to approach this was to try to add some humor. And I can't remember all the details, but it basically boiled down to there were several people in the audience who didn't think my attempt at humor was very funny at all. And in fact, one person got up after I gave my talk and asked a question, and rather than ask a question, just basically lambasted me for being so rude to a very famous stream ecologist, who you can probably figure out who it was, who was on my committee, it turned out. So the big lesson was, when I got back to Corvallis, tail between my legs, I had to wander over to one of my committee members and tell them what had happened and apologize profusely for a bit of inappropriate humor. And so that was a mistake in one sense. And I would urge you, when you give your talks, if you're trying to provide some humor, think about it a bit and maybe test it on a couple of people before you actually get in front of a large crowd. On the other hand, you know, the mistakes that we make are actually our best learning experiences. And so if I would have never made that mistake, I probably would have made a bigger mistake somewhere further down the road. So in some respects, I look back on that and see it as a very good learning experience, which put me on a better path towards being a professional.
I think Jan, if you have anything you'd like to add. Still there, Jan? Maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Yeah, I think you had me muted. So I wanted to go back to the question about when did you get involved with SFS and why, and then kind of the decision, the bad decisions question. So and it kind of picks up on a point that Chuck had. So I got involved actually as a master's student, I think the first summer, and that was in 1975. So I think Dave Penrose is older than I am, but but we've been at the same number of NABS meetings because I missed 2. And the reason I've stayed with NABS for all these years, and it's the primary society that I go to, which is one of the decisions that you have to make. It's like, what society are you going to be part of? How many can you be involved with? And I think it was a good decision, although I've sacrificed other things by being involved, I think, with SFS. That it's just such a collegial group, and the culture is one where, as a grad student, the group of us would stand around and tell each other what we were planning to do over the next 2 or 3 years. And we were coordinating our research rather than competing against one another. And it was like the ultimate science experience, where it was all open and all productive. So it's just, and I still see that in the society today. And I think it's just a great attribute and really important. So I hope you, as a group, will stay involved with SFS and continue to nurture that kind of culture, that culture of openness and honesty and intellectual integrity, and move science forward, and that being your ultimate goal, and solving important problems. But you know, there are a lot of decisions that you're going to make throughout your career, and it's where to publish papers, how many classes to teach, where you want to go work, and you're going to make these decisions. And I think you want to make these decisions about a place that you will be happy versus and something that will make your day great, so that you love work. And that's one of the things I've been able to say almost every day, is that I really enjoy my work. So that can take a lot of different forms, but I think all the other mistakes that you make will be small compared to making the right decision about finding the right kind of position and job and level of university or agency that you want to work at. so that you can balance work and life with your family in a way that that meets kind of what you want to do for the rest of your life. And you don't have to stick with where you start. You can change paths, so don't be afraid to change paths.
Thank you, guys. I want to jump in for just a second in the spirit of admitting our missteps and also in recognition of what Jen just said about how great this society is. It's absolutely not important to me who said it because I can't actually remember, but earlier someone made a reference to schizophrenia in kind of like a going back and forth and can't decide. And I just want to recognize that and what is considered appropriate has very much changed over time. And I recognize that referencing mental condition lightheartedly is not something that SFS, I think, supports. And so I just want to kind of put that reminder out there again, and understanding that like people misstep and just say to kind of, you know, keep that in mind as we continue to talk and have these conversations. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And one second. Yes, I see you, Dave, and you are muted, and I'm working on it. You are unmuted.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with a short comment from Jan's presentation, in that if you haven't seen Rosemary Mackay's History of NABs as a young student, I would highly recommend you get a copy of that and look at, she did a masterful job of summarizing the history up to the, I think the 50th anniversary of our society at the Pittsburgh meeting, maybe. But don't forget the history. The history of our society is pretty darn important.
Absolutely. And Dave, if you have a link to that, perhaps you could send that to us and we'll make sure it gets out to everyone.
Geez, I don't know if there is a link.
Oh boy.
Is there? Jen,
That sounds like a fun hunt then.
This could be.
No, I don't, but yeah. We should make one if there isn't one.
Yeah.
Oh, looks like Sam found it. So we'll push that out later. And thank you to everyone else in the chat that's asking questions. We will get to some of you all in a moment, but I saw, I think Shannon actually asked what I was about to ask. Oh, Bob, I saw you had something first.
Yeah, I just had one other comment. I done some work in the Arctic and some work in the Amazon. And I nearly died because I did not have the right gear in both of those cases. So get the right stuff and get good quality stuff. Don't go cheap on that issue. There are quite a few people in our field, especially in doing field work, that get killed. And there are ways to avoid that. Don't make that mistake. It'll be your last one.
That is an incredibly important insight. Yeah, I think I saw Shannon ask this question in the chat, and I was about to ask it as well. I know a few of you in your introductions, you mentioned you've taken quite windy roads to the point that you're at right now. You've had multiple positions, multiple stops. So I was kind of wondering, what was the path that kind of took you to this point in your career, and why did you take the path that you did? How did you kind of find your way to freshwater science? That kind of stuff. Jen, I think I saw you raise your hand first.
Yeah, I definitely, that one resonates so strongly with me, that question. I remember thinking as a student that I had to know, I mean, no, not even, I mean, I'm talking about like being a fifth grader, right? I had to know it all the way to the end game, where, you know, the path. And what I realized, quite a ways in, actually, probably even beyond grad school, is it's just making the best decision at the fork in the road. And that's all my career really has ever been, is a series of decisions keeping moving forward, but a series of decisions at the forks, and you make the decision at the fork of the road, and oftentimes it was my gut that was sort of the overriding decision maker. Maybe it was my heart. I don't know. They weren't always logical. It was just kind of what I felt. And I remember choosing a graduate program, those types of, it was always the best decision at the time for me. And you don't see the sense of it maybe until way later on. And the other thing I would say, number 2, is never underestimate when you all are mentoring, because you'll be there or maybe are there already, the impact that you can have on a single person. So the reason I'm in Freshwater was Tom Burton at Michigan State hired me. I didn't have any qualifications as a technician, and I did water chemistry for him on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of frozen samples in a giant freezer. And he sat down in his office and went through the NAB's membership directory and underlined every person he thought would be a good advisor that thought about nutrients. And why did he take the time? I have no idea. What a gift, but it set me on a totally different direction than I ever would have expected. So those times that you give to other earlier career folks can change their life. So I just wanted to share that.
Valeria, go for it.
Okay, so I want to share this because it goes nearly opposite to Jennifer. Jennifer is a hard thinker, and I'm a happy-go-lucky somehow, because I was resting in my office thinking on E. coli and why we get sick when NASA knocked the door, literally, in UNAM, Mexico City, and say, hey, we need a population ecologist of microbes to go to Cuatro Ciénegas, and Jim Elser was behind this. And I never thought working A, on astrobiology, B, on limnology, C, thinking that phosphorus is the most important element of life. I never thought about that. It just appeared on the door. And Luis watched, we worked together, my husband and I, and we say, no, you are not tenure yet. The kids are young. We have 2 kids. And I say, well, the posas look so pretty. See, they look like blue eyes. Maybe they are like experimental evolution tests in little ponds, and they have been evolving. And if there's no phosphorus, it will be simple. And I was totally wrong about the simple part, but I was right about the evolutionary experiment in each posa. And not only changed my life, it changed the life of the family completely, because we have to devote ourselves to this new baby. That was not only the research, it was the politics involved in saving this place. And I never thought I had a voice, and that voice was strong, and that I could become a force of nature. I never thought of myself like that. I was just a nerdy professor studying why we get sick with E. coli. And it just banged into my door. And I say yes. Logic will have said no. So just some blocky paths arrive, and just take the chance.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more answer on this question, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Kate to ask questions from the audience. So who would like to volunteer for the last answer? I see Chuck Hawkins raising your hand. You're up.
Sure. I would just like to emphasize that there will be lots of paths, and embrace serendipity, because there's a lot of serendipity that happens. In my case, I turned out to be the first person in my family to go to college. And I went to college because I wanted to play baseball, not because I wanted to be a scientist. But fortunately, I was a bright enough jock that when I got to college, I realized that I was a pretty good baseball player, but I wasn't good enough to make the majors. And I wasn't prepared to spend a lot of time in the minors just to then drop out, 5 years later or so. I also changed my major probably about 6 times. And I was a chemistry major until my last semester in college, and I took an entomology class. And I said, this looks like a lot more fun than standing behind a lab bench for hours and hours and hours. So I decided to refocus on ecology, did a quick master's. But then after the master's, I was going, well, what do I do from here on? I had very little mentoring at that point. And I was actually had some other interests as well, and including thinking about going to culinary school, becoming a professional photographer, or maybe going to grad school. And grad school was actually the third thing on the list. I found out that culinary school was really expensive and I couldn't do that. I thought about being a photographer and I said, they don't make a whole lot of money and I don't know if I'm that good. So I ended up getting into a PhD program at UC Davis. And at the time, my advisor didn't have a lot of funding for me. And so it was basically quarter by quarter that he could guarantee funding. And to put milk and bread on the table, I basically took a half-time job at a private high school, teaching general science and general biology to high school kids in the morning. And then I was living in Sacramento and then driving over to Davis to take classes and so forth. After about 2 quarters of that, I was absolutely exhausted and really was at wit's end in terms of what I was doing. And I saw this job advertisement for someone who knew something about aquatic invertebrates. And the job was in Corvallis, Oregon. And I said, well, that looks pretty interesting. So I actually ended up applying. About 2 weeks later, I got a phone call and did a phone interview with a couple of people, one of whom was Jim Siddell, who we lost a few years ago. And after the interview, Jim says, how quickly can you be up here? And I said, well, quarter ends in 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And he goes, good, we'll see you then. So I packed up my little Volkswagen Bug, drove to Corvallis, Oregon, and joined a project that I knew nothing about, other than when I got into it, they told me they were studying the river continuum. And so I joined the river continuum project as part of the team out of Oregon State and spent the next 2 years as a research tech on the river continuum project. And that was probably the best decision that I never made, or I did make, but not necessarily intentionally, because it allowed me to interact with a group of really good scientists, interdisciplinary scientists, who looked at streams in a whole different variety of ways. And after that 2 years, I was much more clear on what I wanted to do career-wise. And as a consequence, I had opportunity to go to a couple of different programs for PhD, but I really liked what Oregon State offered, so I stayed there, got my PhD, and that single decision, which again was very serendipitous, was probably the biggest factor that influenced what I do now. And so sometimes you have to make a deliberate decision. Other times those decisions are semi-made for you. But you know, if you're flexible, those decisions almost always work out.
Thanks so much, Chuck. I have conveniently run out of whiskey, so I'm going to hand it over to Kate now for questions from the crowd.
Well, I also ran out of my beverage, so that seems unfair. All right, we have come to a different point. I'm going to now introduce myself for just a second so you know who I am. Actually ask that some of the people that submitted questions ask their questions directly. So when I ask you to ask your question, please feel free to turn your video on, but definitely make sure that you unmute yourself because we have defaulted everyone to muted. So my name is Kate and I am a ecology PhD candidate in both Amy Roseman and Seth Wanger's lab at the University of Georgia. And I love ecosystem freshwater ecology. But enough about me. Our first question is one that's actually directed to a specific panelist, and so I want to hit it first. And this is from Lauren, and it's a question to Val. Lauren, if you will pop up.
Hi, Val, I was really interested with what you're talking about in terms of like kind of getting this opportunity presented to you. You mentioned feeling like you didn't have a voice, and I was wondering what allowed you to see that you did have a strong voice where you didn't think you had it before.
Well, it was out of necessity. I learned one day in front of one of the posas that they were going to open 200 deep wells in order to irrigate alfalfa in the valley just south of Cuatro Ciénegas. And by then I knew how the water moved because I had read a lot of geology and understood the fault system, because there was no way to understand the water there. Why is this an oasis and nowhere else? And so I spent the first 2 years of Cuatro Ciénegas research trying to understand the water, where it comes from. And when they told me, oh, they're going to open 200 wells next door, I say, well, it's going to kill this. And I say, in that minute, no. I look at the mountain, I say, well, it's your agenda, mountain, but we are going to do this together. And I did it because I'm a mom and I didn't want to face my kids and say, well, I killed your future kids because I don't care. How would I do that? You need a sense of future. And when you are a mom, that sense of future is barking at you literally every day. And that sense of future is not for just my kids, it's for everybody. So say, well, I don't have anything to lose. Maybe my voice is stronger than what I think. And I start shouting in the desert, and I was heard by many, many people because they were waiting for that bark, for that shout. But till I try, I didn't knew it.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That was a great opening question, just gonna say. Currently inspired. All right, so we're gonna go on to our second question. And for this, I'm going to call on Michelle, who I believe has asked 2 questions. And the one I'm referring to is about communicating your research. Michelle, if you will pop up and ask your question, please. And for the panelists, if you feel called to answer the question, feel free to. I'm not gonna probably let every single person respond because it might take forever, but if you feel like you know what's going on, please speak.
Hi, hello. Well, I'm from Mexico, and I really want to know how, like students, we can communicate our research, not only by papers or something like that, but for example, I would like some examples that how do you use other tools in order to communicate?
Go for it, Jen.
Gotta unmute, thanks. Thanks for that question. I just wanted to share one thing about reaching out beyond sort of our normal ways of communicating our science. I for the first half, I think, of my career, I waited around to be asked, or sometimes I just hoped I wasn't going to get asked. Like there wasn't a news reporter that was going to call me, you know, just don't ask because I'm not sure what to say. But once I had a story to tell, I really wish someone would ask. And I realized that, you know, like our local PBS station or even the news stations are often looking for stories, and being confident that you've got something interesting to share, even if it's from a lens of outreach or education, just call and give a pitch. And we ended up becoming sort of a regular on our local PBS nature and outdoors show. You know, they do segments on different things around, and Notre Dame had never been involved or asked. But once you open the door, almost all the faculty that work in the environment have in one way or another now been tapped by this show to do a segment. And so all I'm saying is don't wait to be asked. If you really want to share an experience or a story, reach out, and that can be a really redeeming experience.
I think, Bob, you unmuted yourself. Did you have something to throw into that?
Yeah, it's similar to what Jen was saying. And as I said initially, reach out to local groups and schools that are really looking for help. I've given talks to third graders on fish. We've worked with elementary students in a Brazilian city where we tested water and bugs and riparian conditions, and then the kids developed reports and they took it to their local environmental managers, and actually they had an effect. They actually began to change some of the discharge patterns that were occurring and contaminating those waters. So that was a lot more success than just submitting and publishing, and faster.
Dave, I think you had something to add as well. Please jump in.
I would like to mimic what Bob just said. One of the real pleasures I have now is working with elementary school children. And here in Asheville, there's 4 or 5 schools that I'm a regular visitor to. And one of the programs that they just absolutely love is the Leaf Pack network that Stroud Research Institute has, you know, where you stuff a bag full of leaves and put it out in the stream and collect it 6 weeks later. The children love it. And the Stroud folks are professionals at advertising and promoting the Leaf Pack network. Not long ago, I was interviewed by 2 sweet little 5th graders, I think, and they had questions, like a whole ream of questions, you know, that they had worked on, and they recorded it and took the recording to the local county commissioners, and it got a lot of attention. So working with children is a good way to get the message out, in my opinion.
I want to ask really quickly, because we are actually getting close to the end of our panelists, if you are willing to stay on about 5 extra minutes, since we got started a little late. It seems like I'm seeing some nods. So if you're not, totally understandable. Feel free to get off. But if you are, please stay on, and we'll just continue with a couple of the other questions that have been submitted. All right. I am going to ask next a pretty hard-hitting question. I'm just going to admit that on the forefront. This is my personal question that I talked about with a couple of other people. So it's going to require a little bit of intro, which is I have fallen in love personally with a lot of what academia offers. The freedom to ask questions and seek answers through research, to engage and learn from and inspire students, and to exist in a world of constant learning. I've really fallen in love with this stuff. But I also struggle immensely with what I consider to often be dysfunctional hierarchy of the academy, and how it has silenced and disenfranchised a lot of people. And so when I think about the choice of where to take my career, I know that I love a lot of what academia offers, but I don't want to participate in harm that perhaps some systems have created. But I also want to be cognizant of being able to be successful when I feel called to change certain systems. So the question I have in light of that is, can any of you, and I don't expect everyone, but can any of you speak to this experience and perhaps your approach to what you consider to be issues in academia, how you may have balanced a desire to change the system and keep a healthy life, or good things that have kept you going? I know that's like a very big 3-part question, but if you can speak to any of that, this PhD candidate would love it.
Valeria, I think I see you with your hand up.
Yes. So academia is a very hard ride. You have lots of bumps. You have to pass your qualifyings and then be a tenure. And there's lots of people that may hate you for very unreasonable reasons. And it doesn't care. If you like to teach and if you like to mentor, that's the way you should go. because it's really rewarding to transform the world through teaching and through showing people how to do ethical and life-changing science. And you can open your voice being an academic and have the whole university behind you. But if you want to be more hands-on into NGO or something that really do change hands-on, maybe it's easier, but then you won't have the support of the university behind you, and you won't have the mentoring part. That, for me, was really the changing part. I wanted to mentor, I wanted to teach. So take that into account.
Jen, I'll call on you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really complicated issue about where you fit. And one thing I wanted to share is that you can't change the whole system, and there are benefits to this larger system that we are, that a university, academic position gives you. There are benefits to that. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that feels like you just have to swallow it. And I'll give you a really concrete example. When I was hired as an assistant professor, somebody more senior said to me, the very best thing you can do is go to faculty meetings and sit in the back of the room and not say a word until you get tenure. And I thought after that piece of advice that maybe I should just quit now, because going and being forced to sit through faculty meetings and not being able to speak because I was playing some sort of political game that I was a person that I wasn't, just wasn't going to work for me. And somebody else, another more senior person, gave me some really good advice. You have to follow what feels right for you. So while it may have been politically smarter to keep my mouth shut for 7 years before I got tenure, and not say to change the things that I felt like I could contribute and change, that wasn't true to my heart, and also didn't give me joy in what I was doing. And so I just sort of said, if this isn't the right position for me after 7 years and they don't want me, then I'll find something else. But at least I contributed, and I felt good about my participation. So you can be in an environment where that larger hierarchy gives you problems or whatever, but you can be true to yourself, and it can either, you know what I mean? That's part of the balance, because there is nothing like the freedom of developing your own laboratory and your own students and your own courses. You really, I'm not going to say don't have a boss, but you kind of don't have a boss. It's sort of amazing. There aren't many other things except owning your own business where you're so free. So I'm just saying, keep it both in perspective, because there are benefits as well as the downsides that you're seeing. Yeah, thanks.
Chuck, go for it. I think you'll have to unmute yourself.
There you go. Just to follow up on some of Jen's comments, one thing to really recognize is that although universities and colleges are often viewed as being semi-dysfunctional or grossly dysfunctional at times, it really varies from department to department and from university to university. So if you are thinking of a career in academia, especially when you get to the point of job interviews, in addition to finding out about what the university does, what the department does, what they want you to do, definitely try to get some sense of whether there's collegiality in the department, in the college, at the university as a whole. That can make or break whether you're happy in academia or miserable. Certainly talking with colleagues of mine, I've been extremely lucky at the universities that I've been at and in the departments that I've been at, in which they have all been extremely collegial. But I know of colleagues who have absolutely opposite sort of experiences. And as Jen said, one of the nice things about academia is that you do have extreme amount of freedom to define what you want to do. That's probably the reason I stayed in academia. On the other hand, it comes at a cost. And the cost is that our vocation is also our avocation And as a consequence, I don't stop thinking about ecology, when 5 o'clock comes around. I come home, I'm still thinking about stuff. I go to bed, I'm still thinking about stuff. And some of my students look at me and go, they appreciate the fact that I'm able to work on what I want to do, but they also look at my lifestyle and say, there's no way I want to do that. And so most of my students are actually going towards working with NGOs, with agencies and whatnot, because they want a better, quote, balance. I think of my life as being fairly balanced, but someone from the outside looking in would see me as a just chronic workaholic. And yet I don't feel like I'm a chronic workaholic necessarily.
Unbeknownst to perhaps the students, one of the questions that we had submitted to the panelists was whether or not they felt they had work-life balance. And I think unknowingly, Chuck answered that question for us. If anyone else wants to jump in on this, I think this is going to be the last question. I have some really great ones that I'm really looking forward to include in our Twitter lunch chat on Friday. But I did want to specifically ask, Dave, since you have actually gone between the world of consulting and academia, if you had a thought on this. And if you don't, that's fine. But if you did, I would love to hear it.
It's a good question. But for me personally, it's always been about what I love to do. And I've never thought, as Chuck said, I'm not a workaholic. I don't think I am. But every day I get up and I start working on a project, and it's just remarkable what you can learn every time you step into a stream. Even after 50 years of looking at bugs from streams, mostly in North Carolina, I'm always learning about, the stream. And for me, that's not a chore. It's not a job. It's a passion. And I think if young people can develop that love and that passion for the science, then it's not work.
Well, with that, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the panelists for giving us some of your time. I want to thank the students that have showed up to ask questions. And if you have a couple burning questions that you want to enter into the chat right now, I encourage you to do so, because as I said, we're going to feature them on our Friday lunch chat. So this Friday, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, have our first SFS lunch chat where we'll continue all of these conversations with the questions that we have from the chat that we just had. And we might post a couple of other ones as well. We're going to use our @SFS_SRC account. That's the SFS student account. But we also encourage you to post your own questions using the hashtag SFS lunch chat. Everyone, members, non-members, are welcome to participate, but we have made sure to contact both fellows and career awardees that do have Twitter to encourage them to participate in this. And if you want to wade into the world and you don't have Twitter, this is your invitation. And then I also want to remind you that next week we'll begin our Diverse Career Paths Week. We've selected 6 panelists representing a diversity of careers in freshwater science. If you follow our Twitter account, student account, you'll get access to who those panelists are, et cetera. That'll be going out. And then our final week will be undergraduate week, where we have a panel of graduate students. And all of these you're welcome to share far and wide. And again, I just want to say thank you to all the fellows who came to share their wisdom, your experiences. We really appreciate it.